Hey, good morning, everyone. I guess we should get started. There'll probably still be some late arrivals here. My name is Professor Trueman. I teach economics at the Center campus, and I'm happy to be joined by Professor Jonathan Oates, who teaches math and statistics at the South campus. So it's great to be here, and thank all of you guys for coming out today. Would you like to add anything, Gisela?
Well, yeah, I really don't have anything else to add.
You got some of your math and statistics students out there? How many Professor Trueman students out there? Okay. How many Professor Cure students? Okay. Does that mean that the South is the better campus? Yeah. All right. Well,
And most of my classes will be watching the recording after, and so that's why the camera is going today. So if you are wondering why that is here, that's the reason.
okay. Thank you.
So I think that other than that, we can go ahead and start. But before we go any further, how many of you heard the video before you sat down of the music playing? All right. So the song was Brick House. So if you've read any of our book today, then you will know that the chapters that we are talking about are 7 and 8, and chapter 8 is called Brick by Brick Savings. So you'll learn a little bit more about how that song ties in later if you haven't figured it out already.
Okay. Professor Oates is going to be handling the technology portion, which is a darn good thing, all right, because I'm not so great with the technology. So why don't you go ahead and put up the agenda for us?
There we go.
Oh, there we go. We've got it up there. Okay, so we're going to give you just a little bit of a brief occupational background. The authors of Core Economics, Banerjee and Dufflo, are mathematicians and economists. And so it's worth mentioning a little bit about what economists and statisticians do. We're going to talk to you about the notion of relative versus absolute poverty, some misconceptions about U.S. foreign aid, particularly since there was some comments about President Trump over the weekend about some foreign aid in some Central American countries that may be relevant to our discussion today. Talk about the different worldviews of helping the poor, and a third way offered by the MIT professors Banerjee and Dufflo. And we're going to, again, focus on the 2 chapters, the lending to the extremely poor and also the challenges of saving. So this is actually our third iteration, our third book discussion on this particular book. And it's probably our final one, would you say?
It's possible, but how many of you have read the book?
That's okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
So we're gonna encourage you guys to participate in the discussion and also in the Kahoots. So you can have your cell phones fired up. Technology is okay in here, and you'll be joining in. See if you can attempt to answer some of these questions. Even if you haven't read the book, it's perfectly fine. All right. We welcome all of you guys in here, and we certainly appreciate your time. So why don't you go ahead and get it started. So economics. What could you do with an economics major? Well, most economics majors with 4-year degrees will end up in the corporate world. So management, finance, or sales positions. Those with more advanced degrees or professional degrees will end up flip on the previous slide. Okay, they will end up with consulting firms. So if you like to analyze data, or if you like to make forecasts using models, you might work with consulting firms. Other folks work for government agencies or nonprofits. Some work in academia, of course, like we do. Maybe also do some research. And a lot of economists actually take the law exam. and have very successful careers in that end as well. So I just have a question for you guys. Who do you think makes more money, economists or mathematicians? Economists? All right, let's see if you're right.
Okay.
That's freezing.
It's freezing, but that's okay. It's freezing. Okay. It's frozen.
So while we're working that out, today we have lots of graphics, lots of slides in our presentation today. Maybe a little bit too many. So we want you guys to be comfortable in here. Don't worry about taking copious notes. If you need a copy of the slides or anything like that, we'll be happy to provide those to you. So economists actually do make more money than do statisticians, but they oftentimes work together. They share similar skill sets. So I actually started off many years ago as a different major in my undergraduate school. I was actually an engineering major, and I stumbled upon economics, and it was like love at first sight. So I changed my career, and it's a good thing. Economics majors median pay is about $102,000 per year, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. But typically, you'll have to have a master's type degree, a graduate degree to earn a higher pay. How about statisticians?
So there are a lot of reasons why somebody would study mathematics or statistics, and you can see here there are some very good reasons here. It is now one of the hottest skills coming up, and there will be a lot of need for people to work in big data projects or in data science fields, and you can see that there is a big prediction for it being a top job for women and lots of other growth and job satisfaction benefits. So what are some things that you can do? There are fields in sports. You can see medicine and health and ecology and the environment, business and finance, and politics and government. So there are a lot of fields that are similar to what economists would work in as well, but a lot of times the two work as a team. So
collaboration, a very important skill, very important skill set, right? It's not just the knowledge, but being able to work well with others and collaborate.
So you can see that the median pay for the mathematicians and statisticians isn't as much, but it is still a fairly healthy 84,000 or so a year.
So that just means that he has to buy the coffee and donuts all the time, okay? The way I'll start with it. So go ahead. All right, let's talk about a notion of relative versus absolute poverty. So, different parts of the world, poverty means one thing and means other things to other people. So it's important to have a definitional understanding of poverty. So extreme poverty, which is our focus today, refers to minimum standards below which no one anywhere in the world should ever fall. It includes the lack of basic necessities such as food, clean water, clothing, housing, and sanitation. Today, extreme poverty is defined by those living on less than $1.90 per day, according to the World Bank. All right? Could you imagine living on less than the equivalent of $2 US dollars per day? Pretty challenging, right? Relative poverty refers to the idea that there are higher minimum standards below which no one should fall, and that these standards should rise as the country becomes richer. We often look at the percentage below a certain line. Okay, so who are the extreme poor? All right, across the planet, most of the extreme poor live in rural areas as opposed to urban areas. Most actually do work, and they work in agriculture. Very few have formal education, well, less than 50%. And many are young, 14 years of age and younger. Okay, we're very lucky in our, rich world. We have the benefits of lots of safety nets, right? So we know that there are people who, maybe somehow fall upon bad times, or difficult times, challenging times, but we're very fortunate in our country to be able to have such straight safety nets, right? All kinds of programs to help people when they need it. All right, so for example, you guys have heard of Obamacare, right? Very controversial health insurance program. All right, so to qualify for Obamacare, for a family of four, basically the relative poverty threshold is about $25,000 today. Okay, and that would qualify you if you have a family income less than $25,000, per year. That would qualify you for the maximum subsidy for the Obamacare. Right? You could get also reduced subsidies if you make more than that. Right? We're also very fortunate in our rich world to have lots of ladders, opportunities to move up, advance yourself, improve your livelihoods, and enjoy life. Right? It's not all just about work. It's also enjoying your life and fulfilling spiritual happiness as well. So what part of the world do you think or what part of the United States experiences the most extreme poverty, judging from the map? Brandon?
Like it's the Gulf Coast.
Gulf Coast, yes, the Southeast. All right, and even parts of Appalachia. All right, so these numbers indicate, right, the percentage of population that lives below that poverty threshold line that we've established here, about $25,000 per year for a family of four. Okay, but in other parts of the world, okay, where there's extreme poverty, where we define poverty again as those making less than $1.90 per day, it's a chronic struggle and hardship for survival. So we've all seen pictures like this, maybe heard stories like this, but oftentimes we associate these stories with natural disasters, with political upheaval. Those kind of things do help to exacerbate condition for the extreme poor, but oftentimes the extreme poor have to deal with these challenges even without those kind of odd events that occur. So this is a survey in Great Britain. It asked that many citizens in the last 30 years, the proportion of the world population in extreme poverty. You could say that most respondents in Great Britain said that extreme poverty has risen in the last 30 years. Just wondering what you guys feel, just by a show of hands. Do you think that the proportion has increased like those in Great Britain? Or do you think that it has remained more or less the same or decreased? How many choose answer choice A? Increased. How many of you would choose the middle option, remain more or less the same in the last 30 years? And how many of you would choose decreased? Actually, that is the correct response. So the proportion of people living in extreme poverty has actually fallen. So it was about 1970, thereabouts, where we had actually seen a actual decline in the numbers of extreme poverty, even while the world population has grown, right? And also an increase in the number of people who are not in extreme poverty. So another way to look at the same data set is to look at percentages. And different researchers have different ways of defining extreme poverty. So we're going by the World Bank metric of $1.90 per day. So you can see the declining trend from about 45% in 1980 to something like 15% or so, 10% maybe today. So the projection is that by 2030, maybe 5%, less than 5% of the world population in extreme poverty. I find that rather surprising. How about you guys? Okay. That's actually a good thing. But where is most of the extreme poverty? What parts of the world? All right. So most of us would conjecture the African continent, right, based on what we've studied, maybe current events in history. But Southeast Asia, right, experienced lots of extreme poverty. And in our own hemisphere, Central American countries, Venezuela, along the northern edge of South America, is also experiencing extreme poverty. Looking at the figures a different way, looking at actual numbers, you can say China, right? The world's biggest population is in China. What a success story. Now, China, 25 million people still in extreme poverty, but as a percentage of the entire population, it's right, numbers actually gone down quite dramatically. So where is most of the extreme poverty? Still in India, Southeast Asia, places like Bangladesh and Pakistan, still struggling with extreme poverty. Some misconceptions about U.S. foreign aid. Have you guys heard over the weekend that President Trump has threatened the Central American countries that he was going to cut off the aid? Did you guys hear that story? All right. There's a feeling that we spend too much money in other parts of the world. But if you actually look at the budget, this is Obama's budget from 2016. The budget was about $4 trillion. We only spent about $50 billion for State Department aid. So that actually represents about 1.5% of the overall budget. And that number represents about 0.3% of our GDP. So while we are a very generous country, right, the money that we actually spend, right, for economic aid and security aid, security assistance is actually pretty small, right, relative to our economy and relative to our budget. Most of the aid, though, does go to African countries, right, rather than to Southeast Asian countries like India, Pakistan, and so forth. And the economic assistance, it really doesn't go to our NATO friends, but rather it goes to our friends in Israel and to countries in the Middle East, right? As opposed to, let's say, our trading partners. So two different worldviews. One is Jeffrey Sachs, who wrote the book The End of Poverty. It's the idea that the extreme poor live in a poverty trap. Right? They make too little to be able to save, to be able to invest for their future. It's the idea that they live in places that are too uninhabitable, right? Places that are landlocked, places that are hot, places that are malaria infested, right? Places that are very, very challenging. And what they need is a big injection of assistance, right? Lots of money and lots of technical assistance, okay? And we get them that push maybe by helping them build some roads, some bridges, help with school lunch programs and things like that. We kind of get them over the hurdle, and then they can take care of themselves, right? That's the kind of the worldview that Jeffrey Sachs enhanced. William Easterly, right, takes the opposing view, and he argues that foreign aid is not necessary. In fact, it actually harms the people that we're trying to help. It makes them too dependent. All right, it makes them too dependent, and a lot of the money and assistance will end up in the hands of corrupt government officials. All right, and that we would be far better off just just leaving them to fend for themselves. So there's a third view, and that is the view of the authors of the book that we're discussing today, Banerjee and Duflo. That is to use scientific methods to determine what works and what doesn't. So we're not looking for radical transformation to bring about an end to poverty, right? But we're trying to find out what things actually work. What does the science actually show? If we can make positive, small, incremental steps, right, that would be the best thing. Okay, so I appreciate, as an economist, I really appreciate this idea of using scientific methods to find out what works and what doesn't, what kind of programs are useful to help the poor. So it kind of does away with the extreme options of spending money and doing nothing. Okay, so fire up your Kahoots. What you have to do is on your cell phone, all right, enter the game pin, 396778. So we have maybe about 20 of you guys in here, or so, 25. And again, you can feel free to participate in here whether or not you've actually read books. There's no problem. Have you guys done this before? Who hasn't done this? Okay, so a few of you. Let me just briefly explain. The question will be announced, and on your cell phone, you're going to have 4 choices. But rather than A, B, C, and D, like in a multiple choice, you're going to have 4 color choices. So it'll be red, blue, green, and yellow, I think. All right, so you pick the answer that you think is most appropriate using the color code on your cell phone. Is that clear? Okay, so you have about 30 seconds for each one. Here's our first question. What portion of the world has the highest country population densities today? I'll bet you many of you know the answer to this. Hey, most of you got the answer correct, right? Most of the population in Southeast Asia, and this is where we find most of the extreme poverty, not surprisingly so. Okay, your mama is in the lead. I don't know who that is. All right, good code word. What percentage of households living on less than $2 a day have loans in the continental Southeast Asia? What do you think? What percentage of those who are living in these very, very extremely poor areas, what percentage of them actually have loans? So, does it surprise you that we're talking people that are extremely poor, right? It kind of surprise you that well over 50% actually have loans, right? Some of you might be wondering, how could they even have any capacity to take out loans if they have no means to save, right, to invest, to maybe put money down, as we commonly think of here in this country. What else? From whom are the extreme poor in Southeast Asia least likely to receive a loan? Least likely. Bank or co-op, okay, traditional lending institutions, which are actually available, particularly in many of the urban areas, even in Southeast Asia. There are traditional lending institutions, depositories, that also serve as places for people to get loans. But Many people use other informal methods to receive loans. Credit extended to the extremely poor borrowers from informal sources was found to be what? Credit to those who did borrow was found to be what? Indeed, very, very expensive. Right? You'd be surprised at the kind of lending rates that the extreme poor have to face. Right? Much more burdensome than what we have here in the in this country. All right. Do you have any more? Yes. Money lenders and microfinance institutions share each of the following characteristics. The answer, can each offer flexibility in the repayment schedule? So we want to talk to you guys in a few moments about what you know about money lenders and microfinance. Just by a show of hands, how many of you heard of the term microfinance? Yeah. Okay, so please share with what you do know, okay? In a few moments, we want to hear from you on what you know about microfinance. Looks like Professor Cure has jumped on the board here. Good job, okay? How much would someone borrowing the equivalent of $5 US have to repay in 1 year at a rate of 4.69% per day? $4.69% doesn't sound like much, does it? It doesn't sound too burdensome, right? But this is how much, I actually ran through the math myself, right? This is how much they would actually have to repay a simple loan like this. All right, so do we have anything else? This is the end of our 10, right?
4 more.
Oh, 4 more. What factor does not generally explain the higher interest rates levied on poor borrowers? Which factor does not generally explain the higher interest rates levied on poor borrowers? Costly government regulations, okay? Not the primary cause, right? So typically due to other factors, and these are some terms, those of you taking macro class, right? You've heard of multiplier effect, right? Maybe monopoly. So these are some economic terms that are being introduced in the reading. What else you've got? Which of the following did a money lender generally not do when practicing due diligence? Money lenders do not hold collateral, right? right? When you guys borrow, let's say for a home, right? Don't the lenders normally require some sort of collateral, right? You put up some sort of asset. So if you default on your loan, right? That's the normal way that we're thinking in the United States of traditional loans. Put something down. The phrase "a beast with two teeth" is associated with what type of lending institution? A beast with two teeth is associated with what type of lending institution? Microfinance. Microfinance has two objectives: a profit motive and also a social mission. Okay, so they operate a little bit differently than companies that we're familiar in the United States that just have a profit mission. Okay, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in microfinance? Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize for his work in microfinance, and we had done a book discussion in the past on his book, Creating a World Without Poverty. And microfinance was one of the things that was evaluated by Banerjee and Duflo as the effectiveness of microfinance organizations. How well did they work to alleviate poverty? Okay, that's a good name to remember, Muhammad Yunus.
So don't close out of the Kahoot yet, because we'll have a few more questions in a couple of minutes. But the top 3 players right now are going to get a prize at the end. So if you're one of the top 3, who are you? Top 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so don't close out. We'll have a few more questions so that you can possibly get in the top 3 later on.
Nadina, you're one of my students, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your code name here? Which one? James. You get some extra money too for doing well on it. Okay, so I want to now that we put the questions out there for you guys, these are some discussion questions. Again, even if you haven't read the book, right? We kind of gave you a few samples of kinds of things that we learned from the Kahoot questions. So are you guys surprised that so many of the extremely poor households have loans? Does that seem to follow your intuition? If you're that poor, right? How can it be that, like in places like Pakistan, for example, over 95% of the households with at least one loan, right? With at least one loan, making less than $2 a day, how can it even be possible? But you also see that in other parts of Southeast Asia as well. Well over 50% of the households have extreme loans. So any comments about that? Any thoughts about that? Maybe the other question will invite more.
A question in the back.
Oh, do you have a question in the back? Yes.
Well, it's not really a question. I guess we were asking why would we think that. I was reading, it was actually, I think it was in chapter 2 of 3 of the poverty trap and poor health and poor health care and poor water and sanitation conditions for people that are sick, what likely to stay sick, or if they have a household. There was that household that was they don't pass the idea, and the father fell ill. He was the behind in their bills, they do not loan. And loan is what really trapped them. It's very good, like case study in the book. Loan is what really.
Okay, so they became desperate, right? After falling upon hard times.
They can never pay it back.
Right.
The interest is just.
So it kind of keeps them mired or stuck, right, in a poverty trap.
Combination of like the poor health conditions with like their son fell ill with cancer.
Okay.
For the treatment, because the father was a breadwinner, everything they went, everything they made, the mother did the loan.
And that's kind of like here in the United States too, right? When we fall upon, a really unfortunate event, right? We have a bad accident, right, through a car, or we get, terrible news from our doctor, and that changes the picture overnight, right? And that forces us to do things that we might not otherwise do. Okay, so in that sense, they're just like us. Put up another discussion question for us. Why do you think that traditional lending institutions like banks fail to serve the extremely poor in developing countries? As I mentioned earlier, traditional banks are still there. You'll find banks in, Islamabad, okay, or in Calcutta. You'll find regular depository institutions that will, make loans to people. But do you think it's a problem mostly of accessibility, if they have a hard time getting there, or is the problem maybe deeper than that?
It might actually be their revenue, because if you have a lot of poor people and you're not going to have a lot of high lines of credit, then why would you do it at all for a poor person that may not be able to afford that? Even the payments, either if they can't make the payments, then they're not getting any money back.
Okay. Certainly, if we're talking about the extremely poor, we're talking about people who are obviously much higher risk, right? Banks, whether here in our rich country or in, Southeast Asia, they have to size up people who are borrowing money. What kind of risk are they, right? And they're obviously more of a risk, right? More likely to default on their loans. Any other thoughts? Oh, you go ahead. You put the answers up already. Go ahead back a little bit. Gathering information, right, about potential borrowers takes time and money, right? So if you've got people that are, as we said earlier, people who are extremely poor and they live in, rural areas, right? Imagine the time and money it takes to size up the borrowers, to gather information about them. What kind of means do they have to pay back the loans, right? Are they trustworthy people? The challenge is much more formidable in, in these kind of places, right? And they are not well suited to perform the due diligence that traditional banks are able to do here in this country, right? But banks can call up credit rating agencies, right, to see how well, you're doing paying back your loans. They can size you up pretty well using third-party information sources. But it's less available in these parts of the world. Why is it generally so costly for the extremely poor to borrow money? So one of the examples in the book that came out in this chapter was this is something that you see a lot in the developing world, right? These are people who make their living, by selling fruits and vegetables on a cart, right? Well, what do? They go to like a wholesaler and they'll borrow money from the wholesaler, right, to be able to get a cart of fruits and vegetables. And by the way, they'll have to borrow money to rent the cart. And they'll borrow based on rates that are daily rates. And if that money is not paid back, right, at the end of the day, then they can rack up lots of hefty interest. So you can see what kind of interest rates you're talking about, right? A 4.69% interest daily. When you take that out on a yearly rate, this is what I ran on my spreadsheet. Can you imagine, your lender charging you this kind of rate annually for a loan, right? So extremely high interest rate costs, and the costs are even higher for informal sources, right? So banks charge you one rate, but if you go to a money lender or if you go to a microfinance institution, they're likely to charge you even higher rates. So why is it?
There's a comment over here.
Oh, you have a comment? Yes.
The reason why like the money over there is like lower than our dollar, like the equivalent, is it because of the loans?
They're oftentimes they're borrowing in local currency, so it's just not having any issue with exchange into dollars or anything like. It's a good question, but traditionally they're borrowing in whatever local currency is used over there. Now there are some places, some poor places where the American dollar is coveted, and they may actually be borrowing in dollars, and in which case that's more risky for them, right? Because their local currency dollars can become devalued or worth less over time, and that means it's going to be more costly for them to pay that back. But a lot of times, most of the time, they borrow in the local currency. It's a really good question.
So why do they charge them such high interest?
Well, they want to be paid back, right? People who lend money, they want to be paid back. And if they feel that their borrowers are more risky, right, then you're going to get higher interest rates, just like they would be here. Okay? But what's so surprising is, not only how high the rates are, but also the fact that by using informal sources, even like friends and family members, that the interest rates, effective interest rates, are still high. Right? Good question. Anybody else?
What is the default rate for something like that? I mean, I know we have relatively high default rates here, and ours aren't that high.
We could see when it comes to like microfinance organizations, for example, and traditional money lenders, they actually payback rates are extraordinarily high. Yeah, even higher than with traditional lenders, right? So yeah, that surprised me too. But the money lenders, the informal sources, use lots of social pressure, apply lots of social pressure to make sure that they get their money back. Okay. So screening and monitoring, the borrowers does not scale with loan size. So whether somebody takes out a loan for, the equivalent of, $10 or $20 here in the United States, or, something like, $10,000, right? You still have to perform the same screening and monitoring. I think maybe you were trying to say something like that, right? It doesn't scale with the size of the loan. There's also multiplier effect that feeds on itself, right? A little bit different notion of the multiplier effect than what you might have talked about in your macro class, right? But something similar, right? Money lenders have to pay more for the money lend out. So money lenders, right, are not like traditional banks. Okay, they're not depository. They're not, safe places where people can park their money. So it's more risky for money lenders. Here's another one. We have to move on to the savings portion of the book for a little bit, but I want to ask you. We have one gentleman here who knew something about microfinance. Okay, how did the microfinance institution like the Grameen Bank, which Muhammad Yunus started many years ago, how does that differ from traditional banks? My picture is a little bit of a clue for you guys. Most of you did not raise your hand. You weren't familiar with microfinance institutions, but again, this is somebody that won a Nobel Peace Prize for this new bank. So what do you think? What do you think some of the differences would be? Do you have any ideas? You said you know something about them. I kind of gave you a little bit of clue earlier. Maybe my picture will help. So these are people who are extremely poor and are not going to a traditional bank. So how does my picture maybe help?
It's usually women that are borrowing money
like in the cottage industries and stuff like that.
Okay, so they're local women, right, who get together and have weekly meetings, right? And they kind of pool their money and make loans, right, to people who need it. Okay, so the shareholders of the microfinance institution, the shareholders are actually the borrowers themselves, right, rather than the traditional bank. So let's put up the screen to show you the difference between classical local bank model and the community bank. Okay, so you can see that most of the borrowers are women. And social pressure, right, having to get together with your fellow village members, you know, that sort of pressure, having people around you to make sure that you follow through with your commitment to pay your loan back, it's not anonymous, right? You're putting your face out there. You're putting yourself out there as somebody who, you know, is going to be held to account if you don't pay back those loans. Okay, so there is no collateral with the Grameen Bank. Right, the shareholders are institutional rather than the borrowers themselves. So one of the things that was mentioned is that a lot of the informal sources for loans are the Kabuli wallahs. Right, these are money lenders. So I found this little short YouTube clip talks to you about the Kabuli wallahs. All right, these are people who sounds like you want to stay away from them, right? But you know, they have a very, very bad reputation. But take a look at the Kabuli wallahs today and see if this helps to explain why so many extremely poor people go to these money lenders as opposed to traditional lending institutions.
खाना वाना अच्छे से मिलता है, कमाई है, हर चीज यहाँ पर है। जहाँ जिंदगी हुई है, जब हम लोग का भी हमारे बुजुर्ग उम्र हुई है, तो कैसे समझे?
It's been over 100 years since the last Kabuliwala walked through these very streets with his bag of kaju and kishmish in search of his Rahim. My curiosity got the better of me. I had to step out in search of these Kabuliwalas, who has since been assimilated into the very culture of this city. Now call it the adopted homeland.
मेरे बाप दादा बम्बई में माँ उतरी में फिर हमारे गए पकड़ते तो कितने 36 साल कोई कभी रास्ते में आपको ये नहीं बोला है कहाँ से आता है कहाँ जाता है ना किसी को बोला तो इस बार जिंदगी कोई नहीं बोला किसी को बंजारे लोग का जो दोस्ती है क्रिश्चियन के साथ दोस्ती है बनवाड़ी के साथ जो दोस्ती है अच्छा प्यार से दोस्ती है।
मेरा नाम यास्मीन खान है और मैं यहाँ पश्तूनों की फर्स्ट लेडी प्रेसिडेंट हूँ। 1949 अप्रैल में जब ऑल इंडिया पश्तून का बुनियाद रखा गया, मेरे फादर को बादशाह खान ने ये सब संभालने के लिए वहाँ से भेजा और हमने एडॉप्ट किया। उस हिसाब से मैं बादशाह खान की ग्रेट ग्रैंडडॉटर हूँ। मेरे फादर के डेथ के बाद में जब मैं चुनी जा रही थी तो उस टाइम में 40% मेरे सपोर्ट में थे पश्तून जो भी यहाँ है और बाकी 60% वो कह रहे थे कि ये एक लेडी है और ये हमारे मतलब कैसे हमारी लीडर बन सकती है एक लेडी। फिर हमने अपना काम दिखाया तो उसके बाद से जो 60% जो अपोज किए वो भी अभी हमारे सपोर्ट में है माशाल्लाह से।
कोलकाता में आपका क्या कारोबार है, आप यहाँ पे क्या करते हैं?
हम लोग बादाम पिस्ता अखरोट कपड़ा कोई बिजनेस एक सौदा how लोकली का बच्चा काबुल से भी लोग ला रहे हैं कि जहाँ पर बच्चा बच्चा पढ़ाता है उसको मिल जाता है। मुझे जमाने में ऐसा पूछता था वो इतना मिल जाता है कि पढ़ाई नहीं जाता। अच्छा लोग अच्छा पढ़ा लिखा है अच्छा उर्दू बोले, अच्छा इंग्लिश बोले, अच्छा हिंदी बोले।
The homes where these Khans stay are known as Khan Kothi. There are about a couple of hundred Khan Kothis in Kolkata. As how I see it, these Kothis generally have high ceilings and minimal furniture with maximum zoom. आपको कभी पश्चिम वापस जाने का, वहाँ पे घूमने जाने का मन नहीं करता?
हाँ जाए, वापस की जगह ये जगह।
यहाँ पर अभी एक काबुल कोलकाता एक रेस्टोरेंट भी खुल गया है, जिसमें अफगानी अफगानी दर्ज के साथ खाने जाते हैं।
ये हम लोग का होटल है काबुल वाला, यही हम लोग खाना खाने के लिए या चाय पीने के लिए जाता है। रोजा महीने में क्या था कि दिन में हम लोग सूर्य रहता है और रात को फिर हम लोग यहाँ आके आराम आता है, ताश खेलता है या कैरम खेलता है।
तो आज ईद है, इस ईद के दिन कैसे बिताते हैं?
सब जाएगा खाना वाना कलम वगैरह सब मिलाकर खुशी करेंगे सब दोस्त को।
For years I have been fascinated by the mornings of Eid. Red Road is one place in Kolkata where Muslims from all over the city come together to offer their prayers, and so do the Pathans living here. Mehban comes alive during Eid. The Afghani beats blasting through the cast areas add to the ambience, and the men dance away as if there is no end to the evening. But what's really astonishing is to see these burly men play a game as mundane as Andakush. It's actually a fight between two hard-boiled eggs. Whichever cracks first, loses. I can see in their faces, the comfort, the ease, the happiness with which they're dancing, thinking, the way they make the city their own. It's heartwarming. Considering the situation in Afghanistan, their reluctance in going back to their own homeland is understandable. It is, however, very endearing to see the way they have been able to create this synthesis between their own culture and that of the city of joy.
भी जो भी कश्मीर यहाँ पर है, कश्मीर अफगान जो भी लोग हैं यहाँ पर, सब वो लोग इंडिया को बिल्कुल अपना ही मुल्क जैसा प्यार करते हैं और मानते हैं।
सारे इंडिया और बाहर आइलैंड।
Kabuli Wallahs, what part of the world do they come from? These are migrants, right? What's that root word, Kabul? What city did that country rep? What's that? Afghanistan, right. So these are men who, back in the old days, they used to get on their horsebacks, right? And they would be like traveling salesmen, and they would go to places like India, you know, to sell their stuff. And they became money lenders, right? And back then they had a rather bad reputation, because if you didn't pay back your loans, right, it was said that they would send the eunuchs after you. Does anybody know what the eunuchs are? What are the eunuchs? Brandon?
Yeah, did you say that they were loan sharks?
Yeah, like loan sharks, right? But these were very aggressive loan sharks, right? The eunuchs were actually men who were castrated, right? And they would show up at your door, and they would flash themselves, and the idea that they would bestow bad luck upon you. Shame on you for not paying back your loan, right? How would you like the eunuchs to show up at your door? Okay? Now, if they didn't send the eunuchs after you, they would send the goodies after you, right? These were local hooligans that would beat you up, right? But you can see now that their reputation has improved, right? They have not only been traveling salesmen, but now they've actually emigrated, right, to places like India. They've started businesses. They're very successful, and because they're so successful, they start these money lending institutions, and they become very, very connected with local citizens, right? And people go to people like them rather than traditional banks. Okay, last discussion question for my section. What did the author's research discover about the effectiveness of microfinance institutions like the Grameen Bank? Most of you, in here didn't know what the Grameen Bank was, or you didn't know what microfinance was, but what do you think? Do you think that the scientific tests that were done, do you think that they showed that the microfinance institutions were successful in reducing poverty, in helping people, give them a hand up so they can escape their plight? Anybody want to guess?
They're focused and they're all every day. It's people they interact with every day. So
You would think that the successful payback rates on the loans, right? And this is a program that, some guy won a Nobel Prize for, right? You would think that they would deem to be, by the scientific research, to be very, very successful. It was a little bit disappointing to me to see these results. According to the randomized control trial, they were somewhat more likely to have started a business, those who received loans to microfinance as opposed to just traditional loans. But there was, they also discovered there's no evidence of reckless spending on things like tea and snacks. Like these are luxuries for the extreme poor, right? Being able to, consume tea and snacks. Right? But there was no evidence of reckless spending on it. Little difference in spending on education and health, though. In other words, this is where we started having problems. All right? There wasn't significant enough improvement in the investment in education and in health for themselves and for their families. Right? And perhaps also disappointing, there was no sign of improvement in empowering women. In other words, in their households. These loans, they were taken out by women, right? But it didn't enable them to, partake in more decision making with the men, as far as being able to make decisions, right? So in that way, it wasn't successful. I was a little disappointed with that. Okay, we're going to talk to you a little bit about saving, and this is the second chapter of the book.
There's another.
Oh, we have another question. Yes, please.
I don't know what this is. Is there a reason why you took out loans from that form and I took out loans from the other form, or is it just it fell that way?
I'm sorry.
Is there a reason where women took out loans that way instead of men, or was it just happened?
The men, women tend to be, the ones that manage the money, oftentimes in the home, and they're taking on the responsibilities of the loans. And traditionally, they have just better payback rates than men do. So they deem to be more trustworthy. I know it sounds kind of sexist, but that's the way it turns out. Are you guys surprised in here that women are more dependable when it comes to paying back loans than men? But those differences are exacerbated in these parts of the world. Good question. All right, if you want to talk a little bit about saving. Yeah.
So for the women, if there are these loans that hit their institution, when their social standing go up and
What institutional? Traditional institution?
the microfinance, would their social status improve even if there wasn't any would it improve in the village or other people around them?
I think the microfinance institutions were successful in bringing village women together, and enabling them to obtain loans that they might not have otherwise been able to get. But like what we just put up on the screen, the idea that the fact that they weren't more empowered within the home. It probably had more to do with tradition, culture, maybe religion. Then went only so far when it came to that sort of thing. So, and maybe in that respect, it's very difficult to understand. Anybody else?
Oh, there's one more back here.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment on the microfinance, like the being bank over there. A lot of like Southeast Asian people, like who were here from Vietnam, after Vietnam War, they came here, but they never trusted banks because of so much social unrest. You put your money in a savings account in the bank, and then they go under and lose that money. So a lot of Asian people still do that over here, but like people don't in those situations that borrow from those community banks, they never borrow enough to really like suck them, give them ahead. They just borrow enough they're short groceries that one bill maybe, but they're not borrowing enough to like buy a new
Before you respond, unfortunately, I get a sense that some people on this side of the room couldn't hear you because there's too much talking going on over there. So if you could summarize your question and speak up a little bit so that the people can hear over the talking, that would be appreciated. So
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, people, those banks they sell really good, like community banks, but there are a lot of Asian people do that here, but it's really not enough to, they charge kind of a high interest rate, but people never, because of the high interest rate, they never borrow enough to really get them ahead. They just borrow enough to, like, if they don't have enough for groceries a week, or and they're not borrowing enough to, like, buy a new car or people for medical treatment or something that will propel them out of that trap. So they do sound like a good idea, but they're really not helpful enough. But there are people still do that because they don't trust, even though they're in America, they still don't trust bank institutions because of where they came from. That's
Very, very well said, and I thank you for your contribution. They sort of, the authors sort of summarized microfinance as saying that it's one arrow in the fight against poverty. So, there was some limited success with them, but they didn't, it's not like, we turned these people into the kind of entrepreneurs that would be able to, develop businesses that would be, so successful that, they would be able to, buy a new home or buy a car and things like that. Right? Just like you said, just sort of to meet day-to-day needs. There's like many entrepreneurs. So very interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about savings then.
So,
And you have some good questions. Right?
yes, I do have some more questions for you. So this would be your chance to get on the leaderboard if you're not already.
Okay, so Jameson, Yasmin, and Nat, we do have some prizes for you. So you can come up at the end and make sure that you get a prize. Okay.
But I talked about this at the beginning, but now I'm going to ask you, what does saving brick by brick mean? So try to go ahead and choose the correct answer now. Now, some of these are pretty easy questions to get, and some of them will be I don't know why some of you chose the wrong answer there, but saving brick by brick in the context of the book here today means it's how the poor build a house one brick at a time. So generally, you'll see a lot of unfinished homes in poorer countries because they're only building one room at a time, rather than building the whole thing pretty cheaply while they have the money and then having it turn out poorly and then having to rebuild the house a few years later. So I think that's what would make sense to a lot of people, right? I mean, you wouldn't just go ahead and build something with cheap materials that would actually fall apart right away. So they're doing it one piece at a time, or one small little piece at a time. So it looks like some of the leaders have fallen down there. Let's try another one. So a small deposit account offered to the poor as an incentive to store funds for future use. What is that called? If you get the wrong answer here, that's sort of what you're saying, but micro-saving, microwaving, or microwaving. Some of you look like you're raving on the weekends, so maybe that. So there, yeah, see, one person does microwaving on the weekends down at the micro club somewhere. So micro-saving is just a small deposit account offered to the poor. Who has heard of all of this micro-saving before today? All right, one person. So what did you know about it before today?
Just as it actually is stated on the board, for them, primarily for people to use.
Yeah, and the biggest thing about this is that it really is for people who only have a small deposit to make. So we'll get more into the details as we go through more of the questions here, but we have the same leader here, but how about this one? If given microcredit, spending goes down and savings goes up, so true or false here? Now, this is going to be similar to the questions from the last chapter because there will be similar trends with microcredit and micro savings. Oh boy, so it looks like about half of you actually got that one wrong, but it is true here that the spending goes down and the savings goes up, but it's generally what you might expect though. If people are given the credit, they have a little bit more of a peace of mind of having that particular bill or whatever it was that they wanted to get paid off, and so they're more comfortable with saving money at that point. And can you see how that would work, right? I mean, if you have your needs met by maybe credit to buy a TV or whatever it might be, then you might be more comfortable to save some money after that. So if you have any questions, feel free to chime in, but I know that, oh, well, you know what, that's pretty close there. So what percent of the rural poor in Indonesia have an account in a formal savings institution? So this is asking about the rural poor. I'll ask about the urban in the next question. 59, 8, or 56%. All these numbers are placed together. I got these numbers at random, so yeah, I feel like who didn't choose 8 or 9 because they thought those were numbers really close together. This wasn't meant to be a trick question, but it is 9%. Now keep that number in mind that only 9% of the rural poor in Indonesia have a savings account, because now I'm going to ask you about the urban poor. So who thinks that before I go on to this one, that the urban poor will have a lower percentage than non? Right? Who thinks it might be higher? Right? Who thinks it might not be any difference at all, and that if somebody is poor in Indonesia, they're just poor? Okay, so it seems like more of you generally thought that it would be a little bit higher, but remember that the last one was actually 9%. So now I'm going to ask about the urban poor here. So 19%, 5%, 57%, or 12%. Now, only one of those is lower than the 9%, so about lower, that's the one that you probably should choose. wasn't that much higher, right, at 9% versus 12%. So did that surprise anyone that you maybe thought it would be higher, but a little bit more higher than 3% more? But you know, there is a lot of reasons for that, but we'll get into those in a moment here. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I know that all of the major things will be covered here. So in financial terms, what is a RSC or RSC? So there's a lot of good choices up here. Does anyone know oil? That's a pretty good one to be a part of. They play Saturdays at 2 p.m. But this one they can't. Saturdays at 1 p.m. All right, so one person got stumped apparently, or else they really like swimming that much. So I can't really tell which one that might be, but this is the Rotating Savings and Credit Association. So we'll talk a little bit about what those are in a minute, but what's your question? Oh, okay. So essentially, these are the, what these are, they're also known as merry-go-round lenders, because the people who are trying to save all put their money in this pot, and then because the banks really don't want to open savings accounts for people with a small deposit, when they pool their money, they have a lot more money to deposit at the bank for their savings account. And then what happens generally is that they take all that money, it gains the interest over the month or whatever, and then every month it rotates who gets to take that big pot of money out of the bank and then use it to pay their bills or whatever it is. So that's what it really comes down to, is that's the rotating part of it, is that they rotate who takes the whole lump sum out of the bank every time, but they all put the same amount in every time. Yes.
So they have to they just decide, or just go like an order?
They would generally have an order written down. I mean, I think that I would not, if it were me, I wouldn't join again the next month. The same person kept on getting it every month. But a question with that.
You already said that it's more of a community mindset for saving and credit.
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is that they really are doing this because they want to be in it together. Like, they know that everyone in the group is saving for something else. So there was an example in the text where there was a woman who knew that she was only going to get the money every 4 months, but then that's when she used it to pay her utility bills, right? So she only paid her utility bills every 4 months, but then when she did it, she had that big lump sum at once, so she prepaid for the whole 4 months, and but that gave her a little bit more money than if she would have had otherwise, because that little interest amount, however small it might be, coming off of that money, large sum sitting in the bank every month. So they really are there to help each other.
Would you say that this is like a good, successful tactic, I guess, for someone who needs help?
So that's very interesting that you say that, because there's a few more questions later on that get at that point. But you know what? I feel like we all are in some situation where, if we're trying to save for something, you can get really, really close to it and then never actually achieve the goal for whatever reason. Like, I know, for example, somebody who was trying to save for a house, and they had a down payment, finally saved up to what they thought that they would need, but at that point the market went really in the seller's direction. They need an even higher down payment. So like, somebody could actually get to the point of saving what they need, but then at that point need more money So that's why a lot of times people, I think, feel like everything's just a little bit out of reach, and so they're just more of a spend it now sort of situation. So this type of thing really helps with, all right, I know that I'm not going to get enough money to ever get that really big item I want, but I need to pay my bills now, but I don't want the money to go to other frivolous things, and that helps prevent that. So in that regard, this actually is of a benefit. But in a saving for a bigger item, probably not, because there's still problems with that for all the other variety of reasons that I mentioned. Are there any other comments? This is actually a very interesting thing, though, that people are pulling their money because of only having a small deposit available to them. So those are all very good questions. But Moo is now in first place by, what is that, like 2 points. So
And who's moved? I can tell you were very anxious.
true or false? The poor say less with strategies like ROSCAs, they had a bank account. So this is actually very similar in nature to some of the questions that came definitely false. Now, it seems like that you would say, oh, they would say more, but actually that's not necessarily the case. So this is strategies like that. So another strategy that was tried in the book was that people were given a lockbox to put in their house, and then somebody outside of the house was given a key to it. And then whenever somebody wanted to save money, they had the person come over with the key, unlock the box, and then put the money in there or take the money out, whatever it might be. And even though the money was still in the person's house and it wasn't going anywhere, the fact that they didn't have the key actually caused the person to believe, hey, I don't have access to my money when I might need it if an emergency happens, so I'm not going to save anything. So it actually causes people to save less than just leaving it in a bank. So these strategies are a little bit.
It's sort of reminds me of the piggy banks. Like when you put your money in the piggy banks, it'd be like little ceramic objects, right? And you couldn't get the money out unless you actually broke, to break the bank, literally break it, right? So the idea is this would be a way to force yourself to save, right? It's kind of like a psychology is involved in, both saving and spending.
Now, you better watch it because I can kick you out at any time. So,
Right. How many more do you have? Because these students got to get out of here to our next class.
well, we have a few more. So I'll try to go quickly through these ones. So the quicker you answer, the quicker we can get out of here. This one is a bit to be a trick. I thought that all the other stuff you're on your phones already. Some of you obviously are not on Badoo. Who is on Badoo? Who knows what Badoo is? It's a dating app, see, so this, I knew a lot of people would choose this one, MPESA, but that's actually a cash app payment that's actually pretty big in Kenya and other African countries, so.
How about two more?
All right, two more. So, true or false? This is difficult one. So that is is true here. So even when there were no fees to open the savings account at the bank, not very many people actually use the savings account. And part of that is for some of the same reasons that I mentioned already, that they're afraid that the bank has their money or somebody else has their money. And then last chance move to get back to the top. What is not one characteristic of a noise trader? If you don't know what a noise trader is, it's somebody who has all of these characteristics with one of them. So it's nobody if I can give you So noise traders generally are people known on Wall Street as traders who are new to Wall Street and do all these things like impulsive behaviors and making decisions without getting good advice and just being very, very greedy. So I know that some of you have to go, so who are the other people who will be getting a prize today? That would be, who is Sue Shuck? Very good. Emily, and a thick with 4 C's. So, should we read out the whole?
Yes. So how about we have the 2 first place winners, Jameson and Duchette. Come on up. You get first pick in the prize.
And do we have any closing words? I think that that's about it. If you actually want to stay after to ask other questions, both of us will stick around for a little while. So thank you for coming. Enjoy your afternoon.